going on, people? Welcome to United View and welcome back to the Tactical View. Unfortunately, the international break's come and gone, but nothing has changed at Manchester United, and it's another disappointing result, this time against Newcastle away from home. Our away form this season has been poor, and in today's show, we'll be breaking some of that down. We'll be looking at our pressing structure and why it makes it so easy for opposition teams to bypass us. We'll be looking at our structure in possession and why it made us so poor yesterday against Newcastle, and then we'll be taking a little look at the transitional nature of the game and why United aren't doing so well and that sort of thing right now. So without any further ado, let's get into the show. Now, we'll start the show as we normally do with a little look at the Newcastle team. And so I think straight away what you can really see from the Newcastle team is that, again, it's a team based on physicality. They've got a lot of physical players, particularly Longstaff and Joe Willock. They're runners. They're not the best technical players in the world, but physically, they're going to dominate the duels. And that was a key theme of this game, was that Newcastle won the vast majority of their duels, where Manchester United were just simply unable to do so. Outside of that, I think we know Kieran Trippier, in terms of the way they play, is really crucial because they build up a lot more down the right. What we tend to see when they play is Trippier will push on a lot more, allowing the right winger, whoever that is, to tuck inside. Normally that's Almiron, so he can tuck into the half space where he tends to excel. On the other side, Dan Burn tends to sit a little bit deeper, so they build up in more of a three. And the idea then with Dan Burn sitting a little bit deeper is that then isolates St Maximin one-on-one with the fullback because the pressing winger's got to stay fairly high. So that puts him in a situation where he's able to excel. In terms of defensively, obviously Nick Pope's very good at claiming crosses. They've got a very sort of compact, solid back four, which is something to really commend them for. Now, as we mentioned there, in terms of the stats, in terms of duels and stuff, we'll get this graph up here. So first of all, the first thing I want to look at is how much Newcastle played out down their right-hand side. So we mentioned Kieran Trippier was crucial. And as you can see here, in terms of the play areas for Newcastle, down their right side, that was where the majority of their play came, where the majority of their fantastic attacks came, and that is where they started causing Manchester United all sorts of problems. So there was a lot of talk in the build-up about St Maximin versus Dalot and how maybe Wan-Bissaka would start. Obviously, as it turned out, Wan-Bissaka was ill, so couldn't start the game. But what we ended up with instead was Newcastle actually exposing a systematic weakness in the way Manchester United play, and it was mostly down this right-hand side where Marcus Rashford's role in the press was completely destroyed, if we're honest. In terms of the other stuff for the play areas, obviously because Newcastle were dominating the game down that side, United were in a similar position where we had to play out down that side a lot, so it's our left side. I think also, we'll come on to it later, but in terms of the way we're structured, we obviously try and favour the side where Luke Shaw's playing because he's one of our best players in terms of playing out from the back. Also, Lisandro Martinez on that left side. And also, I think in terms of the angles, it favours De Gea if he kicks out towards that left side. So oftentimes when De Gea's in trouble, if he's going to pick out a pass either side, he'll look for that left side rather than the right, just because of the way the passing angles work. Also, in terms of Marcus Rashford being there, often when United are in a difficult situation, it's Rashford that we look to try and sort things out. So what we'll look at now is the pressing structure that United use and how it got so brutally exposed by Newcastle in this game. So as we've mentioned throughout the season here, really, United use a particular sort of structure which we've called hybrid pressing. So what we typically see is when, for example, Newcastle played out from the back and they set up like this, they split the centre-backs, you get the full-backs in these sorts of positions, although Dan Burn's probably a bit narrower normally. What you'd see is Trippier would push on a little bit. And the way United tend to play, as we've seen throughout the season, is we set up with our front three opposite this three of the keeper, of the opposition team here. So we had up with Weghorst opposite the keeper because he was striker, you had Rashford opposite Fabian Schär, and you have Anthony opposite Botman there. Now, what that means, and the glaring weakness with this, is that if the winger isn't able to lock on and read the body position of the keeper, read when they're going to pick up their foot to play that pass, you can end up with a situation where this ball gets out to the fullback and the fullback receives the ball in time and space. Now, it's really up to the winger in this situation to shape where that ball goes by starting in the right place, starting deep enough that there's no area to just clip that ball into. The idea there is sort of make this area as small as possible. So this target area, realistically, is the area that the keeper can clip that ball into and the fullback will get there first. So the closer the winger starts to the fullback, the smaller that area becomes because there's a good chance that the winger can get there before the fullback there. But obviously if they start too close, then this ball into Schär is really easy to do. Now, in terms of the way that United set up behind that front three, we typically tend to set up man for man in midfield. So what we saw in the first half at least was McTominay on top of Bruno Guimaraes. He was touch tight on him. We had Sabitzer on Joe Willock and we had Bruno Fernandes on Sean Longstaff. And what that means is that because we're man for man in that area, we're really well set up with those 1v1 battles to make sure that we've got this zone in the middle of the pitch here. This three-man zone here, where anything that comes in there is a 1v1 battle. So if these Newcastle players have a loose touch, any sort of slip up, and this United player is able to nip in quickly, we're likely to be able to generate a transitional situation. So what we want, really, rather than trying to force Newcastle around the outside, what we're trying to do, and what the wingers are trying to do in this hybrid pressing approach, is actually force play back inside into this area where we're so well set up for the ball coming in there. So if, let's say Anthony, because he was much better at doing this, if the ball goes out to Botman, Anthony would curve his pressing run around there to force that ball, to prevent that ball going to Dan Burn, and therefore force it inside, where if United win our duels, which again was a little bit of a difficult one, we didn't always tend to do that, but if we can win the duels, we can probably generate a quick transition, a quick counter-attacking situation, and put ourselves into a really dangerous position. Unfortunately, what kept happening during the game was Marcus Rashford in particular got his pressing angles all wrong and wasn't quick enough to recover. So what we typically tended to see was Rashford would start far too narrow to the point where he'd start too narrow and too deep to the point where he couldn't press the centre-back quick enough. And what was happening was the ball would go out from Pope to Fabian Schär. Rashford would get somewhere near the centre-back, but it's a very easy ball round the side to Trippier. And in that position, from there, obviously Trippier's in time and space, he's a fantastic ball player, so that's dangerous enough by itself, and sort of typically one way that you could deal with that is Rashford recovering quickly to try and get out to Trippier, but he wasn't making those sprints, he wasn't putting in the effort to track back. But the bigger problem there is that because that ball's gone outside, our midfield structure where we were previously man for man, generating those 1v1 battles, is completely destroyed, and because you're man for man rather than sort of being compact zonally, well there's not much space in between you, if this structure gets broken and someone has to go and do a different job, let's say Bruno has to come out here, you're leaving a man alone in an enormous amount of space and you're relying on the other players around him to quickly notice that you've got to deal with the deeper player there. So what we end up seeing quite a lot is that Rashford will get sucked in, be a little bit too slow going there, not recover quickly enough. So you'd see Bruno Fernandes having to go out wide onto that sort of side there, that right-hand side for Newcastle, left-hand side for United, get close to Trippier. And what that would mean was that Sean Longstaff was so often free in the midfield in enormous amounts of space, because if there was a good spacing from Newcastle players, these guys stayed far away from Longstaff, that would mean that there's a big gap, a big distance there for McTominay and Sabitzer to try and make up if Bruno's had to leave his man. So it means that there's always somebody free in this area. So turning that area from an area of strength where United are likely to win the ball back into an area where there are large open spaces, which these Newcastle players love. These guys are brilliant at carrying the ball in open space. Bruno Guimaraes, Joe Willock, Sean Longstaff. Where they excel as players is not breaking down a tight, compact defence with technical passing, clever sort of through balls, that sort of stuff. Where they excel is carrying the ball into open space. So we've given them what they're good at, and as well because of the sort of comparative defensive ability of McTominay and Sabitzer to someone like Casemiro, who's elite at being able to read the game. These guys weren't able to switch quickly enough to adapt to this situation and mark the most dangerous men. So, to show this and sort of showcase our pressing, we've got some clips coming up here. So, first of all here, what you can see at the very start of the clip is that Weghorst's been drawn in by the goal kick. So the goal kick has been played, it's gone out to Sven Botman here. Let me just drag that out of the way. The ball's gone out to Sven Botman. Sven Botman's played that back across to Nick Pope, but you can see Weghorst started somewhere here and he's now been drawn in by the centre-back there. What that now means is that the situation on the opposite side is exactly what we've talked about with Rashford being drawn into the wrong position. So you can see McTominay's there, right on Bruno Guimaraes, and as we play the clip on, you'll see that on the other side, Bruno Fernandes is right next to Sean Longstaff. He's just out of shot at the moment. But as we play this clip on, watch what happens. So you see Weghorst gets drawn out. As that ball goes into the other centre-back, you see Bruno there is on top of Sean Longstaff, but Rashford here with his pressing run, he isn't getting out quickly enough to stop that ball there at Fabian Schär. He isn't sort of between Schär and Trippier enough to the point where it's difficult for him to play that pass, so he's not really cutting anyone off. He needed to start wider and curve his run, or get out quicker so that Schär doesn't have the opportunity to just chip that ball over him. So what you see happen there is because he's so slow getting out, he's not really sprinting there. Very easy for Schär to chip that ball over into that target zone. And what you can see here is that because Bruno Fernandes has now had to go out to deal with Kieran Trippier there, he's out here. Let me just draw that. Yeah, he's had to go out there. And what you end up with here is a free man here. So now in this situation, we get away with it just about because Wout Weghorst is able to recover. But in a lot of situations where Weghorst isn't able to get back in quickly enough, perhaps if the Newcastle fullbacks are a little bit higher up the pitch and therefore the spaces are a bit bigger, or if maybe they passed it side to side a couple of times. Look, this body language here, I didn't even spot this earlier, I've just seen it now. What are you doing? Sprint back, get into position and help out the team. Because it's so poor from Marcus Rashford that I've just seen that. That's my live reaction to that. First time I've noticed that in this clip. But yeah, without Weghorst dealing with Sean Longstaff there, we're exposed, and you can see all it would take is Trippier waiting a half second longer for Bruno to get out, dropping that ball back in here, and McTominay's not going to be able to recover quickly enough, so then it's a 2v1 with Longstaff and Joe Willock on the other side against Sabitzer, and they're straight through United's midfield and out really quickly. So you can see there, the hybrid pressing approach of our wingers starting opposite the centre-backs is getting brutally exposed by the way Newcastle played. So, got another clip here of a similar thing sort of happening, but in the mid-block this time. So what we've got here is Newcastle on the ball. You can see as it comes out here, watch what Anthony does. So obviously Anthony's been under Erik ten Hag for a lot longer. He's played under him at Ajax, so he's a lot more used to this hybrid pressing approach. He's a lot more used to the roles and demands of the system, and so he's got a better idea of where he wants to be forcing the ball at all times. He's aware that he's not just pressing because you're sort of supposed to make a run here or do that. He's aware of the reasons behind it, where he wants to force the ball, and how that can benefit the team. So if you watch his run here to start with, look how he curves his run there to try and cut off that pass to the fullback. And as we've said, because United are man-for-man in midfield, you want to force that ball back inside from the centre-back to an area where we're likely to win it back. So you can see he curves his run round here to try and stop that ball going to Dan Burn, but also it means that if that ball does go to Dan Burn, which it ends up doing in the end, he has to take his first touch backwards and play it back. So you can watch that from Anthony, and obviously, look, Dan Burn in that situation, because Anthony's curved his run to get goal side, rather than just coming around here and somewhat pressing him to the point where Dan Burn could step through, he's forced him to play backwards there. And so when he goes backwards, that's then a trigger for Wout Weghorst to get up in the press when the ball goes to the other centre-back. But look, in contrast here, look what Rashford's doing with his positioning. Anthony's telling Rashford here, you need to be in between the centre-back and the full-back. He's not. Rashford is not on that line there. Obviously, it goes through his head, but it's not a 3D picture. But Rashford's not on that line to the point where all Cher's got to do is step up a couple of yards and he can curve that pass round into Kieran Trippier. Rashford is not in the right place there. He's just basically charging at the ball without any thought for his actual role within the team. And this was part of the reason, again, that United got so exposed so easily down that right-hand side. And as you can see here, very easy for Cher to just find that ball past. And just scrub back here to this particular moment. Look, you can see again, because United are man-for-man in midfield, again, Bruno's going to have to go out and deal with that, and that leaves somebody free. You can see, if Bruno goes out to deal with that, once he goes there, look, midfielder's free because of Bruno having to go out to deal with that situation. So that's the problem that we end up in if the wingers don't fully understand their roles in the press. And that's why United is so easily exposed. Final clip of that here is this one's come from a throw-in, so you can see the throw-in getting taken now. And as you can see here, look, that's Bruno there. Let me just draw that out for you. That's Bruno there, dealing with Kieran Trippier there. That's Jacob Murphy, so Luke Shaw's there, man for man, as they possibly should be, but Bruno's had to come out here, which leaves Sean Longstaff free here. So in this situation, even if Rashford hasn't come back for the initial throw, he has to track Sean Longstaff. He can't just let him go. And, well, you can guess what happens next. Trippier just plays the ball into Sean Longstaff. Rashford's not anywhere near the picture. And look, yes, Martinez does well, but we shouldn't be into that recovery defending mode because that situation should never be allowed to develop. Rashford has to spot Sean Longstaff in that position and deal with the threat at source. It is pathetic from Marcus Rashford, that. And look, that is why we got so exposed and why Newcastle was so easily able to play out down our right. And Marcus Rashford's defensive performance was atrocious in this game. Look, like every other United fan, Rashford scored some really important goals for us recently. He's probably the reason we are where we are in the league and in cup competitions as well. But in this game, his defensive performance was terrible. Didn't look like he was interested. Didn't look like he wanted anything. So he needs a big reaction if he's picked to start in the next game Wednesday night against Brentford. So that's how we pressed, that's how we played out of possession. Now we'll deal with how United played when we had the ball. So what we saw in this game was more of a 3-2-5 structure when we had the ball, when we were trying to build up. And the way that was formed, so you see on paper we start with a 4-2-3-1 here. You've got Shaw at left back, Bruno and Sabitzer in the middle, McTominay playing as a 10 at least in the first half, Rashford and Anthony on the wings, Weghorst up front. And the way that sort of changed when we were playing out from the back into this 3-2-5 was that typically we saw Luke Shaw push into midfield, Bruno Fernandes get higher up the pitch as well. And so what we were left with is Martinez, Varane and Diogo Dalot as sort of the three. You've got Sabitzer and Shaw as a double pivot in there. And then you end up with this sort of front five sort of shape in front of Rashford and Anthony on the wings out wide. You've got Weghorst through the middle. You've got Fernandes and McTominay offering in here. Now, the reason why Erik ten Hag wants to use a structure like this is that it suits the players we've got. So in the build-up, in the first line here, what we want to be able to do is give these players space and time to pick a progressive pass forward, pick a pass into one of these front five. So I think the situation that United are in at the moment is that these two here, this double pivot, their job is mainly sort of a tactical job. Their job is mainly, by their positioning, move the opposition inwards, force them narrow so that we can find passes into that front five. Because let's face it, at the moment, we haven't really got any players in this position that can actually receive the ball in the half-turn and play forward, which is a massive problem, and that is why an 8 is at the top of the transfer list for midfielders and players that we need in the summer for Erik ten Hag. But at the moment, this is the way we're getting around it. So rather than sort of relying on players that can receive the ball in the half-turn here and play forward, which Luke Shaw sort of can do, but not quite as well as, Frankie de Jong or Christian Eriksen, that sort of player, we're having to rely on this first line here to have players that can pass the ball forward. So that's why Dalot was playing, that's why Martinez was playing, and the idea was to give these two as much time as possible on the ball in the half spaces to pick out a pass forward. So you often see Dalot, rather than being really wide, he was tucking in a little bit narrower, so then it gives him the passing angle out wide, as well as the ones into the centre. And the same thing with Martinez on the other side. So what that was doing was, as well as giving these two, hopefully, time and space on the ball to find passes forward, it was getting Scott McTominay as far away from this first phase as possible, where he tends to hide and not show for the ball. And it was getting Bruno Fernandes higher up the pitch as well, wherever possible. He was a little bit less of an issue, but he can be a little bit sloppy, although sometimes he was rotating him and sort of swapping places with Sabitzer. So that was the sort of the basic structure that we tried to use. And the idea then is that you sort of restrict the game into two parts. So what you do here is you give yourself this area here, and what you're doing is you've got a 5v4 overload. So you've got the Newcastle front four in the way they pressed, typically with the front three and sort of one of the midfielders pushing up behind. And so United have got 5 players against 4 in that area to try and dominate the ball and try to circulate it, retain it until the time is right to play forward. Unfortunately, we didn't wait till the time was right to play forward. We just kept wasting possession. I've no better way to say it. Kept wasting possession, kept giving the ball away. It was very frustrating. The other part of this structure, which Erik ten Hag is sort of trying to create, is obviously by tucking Luke Shaw in and having Martinez fairly narrow, you can hopefully try and isolate Rashford 1v1 with the fullback, which sort of puts him in the best position possible. And also, you get this sort of funnel shape that you're essentially creating, where the passes, if they're coming through midfield, sort of end up like this. So what it means is that if the opposition team win it back, it's going to be difficult for them to try and break out, and there's always United players around where the ball's going to be, so that we can try and counter press quickly. So as long as we don't give the ball away in stupid situations, it should set up United with a strong rest defence shape so that we can win the ball back quickly if we do lose it. Now, it didn't really work at times because Newcastle were very easily able to win it back in these sorts of areas. These guys would make a run out wide quickly, and one pass there will get them away. Yeah, so the other thing we saw in build-up quite a lot is obviously with the way Newcastle were pressing with this 3 and a 1, is that obviously there's only one striker. So you only really need 2 in that deepest line for United to sort of deal with that, to give you the overload. So we often saw Varane stepping through onto the next line to join in midfield, which enabled one of the other 2 to push on forward to the next line themselves afterwards. Now, in the second half, we did change things slightly. It was more of a 4-1-5, so Luke Shaw would play a little bit wider there, which was sort of an attempt from Ten Hag to give us more ball retention, make it a little bit easier for us to play side to side and circulate it as long as we needed to. But again, there were more technical errors, more things going wrong, and it just prevented United getting any sort of foothold in the game. So what we're going to do now is have a look at some clips here again to see if we can show what was going on here a little bit better in more detail. So in this clip here, what you see is we've got the 3-2-5 structure again here. So you've got Dalot, you've got Varane, you've got Martinez there, you've got Luke Shaw in midfield here, and you'll see Sabitzer tucking in as well. Now what this does is it draws the Newcastle front four in. So as we mentioned there, in terms of the way Newcastle were pressing, you've got this front four, you've got the striker here, Alex Isak, and then you've got the 3 behind. And with United, as we mentioned, you've got that deepest 3 to build, then you've got Shaw and Sabitzer, who's somewhere there as sort of your double pivot, basically. So the way it worked in game, again, obviously isolates Rashford over the far side, which we'll see in a second. But what you can see happening here is Dalot's on the ball, goes back into Luke Shaw. Look at Sabitzer's movement to try and get deeper into that double pivot. They're staggered, which is good spacing at that point. Ball goes back round there. And what you can see is Varane steps through onto the next line, again, because there's only one striker, so we've still got that base of 2 behind, so there's no real worry if there's, as long as he retains the ball. He steps through, affects the striker's movement to give Dalot and Martinez a little bit more time on the ball. So we'll move on to the next clip now. And what you see in this one is, again, a similar structure again. So you've got the 3 and the 2. This time it's Bruno Fernandes in the 2. So you've got the 3 there, back 3 there, and you've got Shaw and Bruno there, so you see Shaw's tucked in again, and again that means that Marcus Rashford's isolated over this far side here somewhere, just out of shot there, and then you've got that front five in front of them. And again, you can see a fairly similar structure from Newcastle, where you've got the one striker, Alex Isak, you've got the winger, you've got a midfielder, and you've got the winger on the far side, although in this case, Longstaff's also pushed up there as well. And again, you can see, because the double pivot there are both this side of the Newcastle midfield line, you've attracted a fair amount of space in behind. So that's the idea there, in terms of, if we can attract these Newcastle players up the pitch by having this structure, we can create space in behind, and that allows you to have that front five where, if you're able to be accurate, if you're technically secure, you can get the ball into that space, and then the forward players can do their thing afterwards. So if we play the clip again, we'll see Varane stepping through in a second, but Dalot plays the ball into Varane. Again, you can see, because he stepped through, we've still got that 2 if he needs to recirculate the ball. We're able, even if Isak presses Dalot there, he can get it out to Martinez, we can play out nice and easily. But Varane steps through there, draws some players in, and he's able to find that pass forward. So we see Varane, he may not be the most talented in terms of receiving the ball at his feet and picking out a pass when he's given space and time. That's why he's the one moving forward, and Martinez and Dalot stay deep, because they're the ones that can pick out a pass given that space and time. So Varane stepping forward, taking the ball at pace, and using that to mitigate his technical shortcomings, whilst you've got Dalot and Martinez in time and space a little bit deeper to try and find the passes forward. So in this situation, obviously, Rashford ends up playing back, ball goes out to Martinez, and Martinez then plays it into McTominay there, and that's the frustrating thing. So we've done the hard work in terms of drawing the Newcastle players up the pitch, we've created that space in behind as we've highlighted, and then as that ball goes into McTominay, look, Martinez does a brilliant job to curve that ball into that channel. We've done the hard part of getting the ball into the front five, and then it just doesn't stick. And when the ball doesn't stick, when you give it away in that sort of situation, that was Weghorst actually, but when you give the ball on the way in that sort of situation, all the hard work you've done in terms of building this structure, setting the tempo, getting the right players in the right positions to move that ball forward, you get into the final third and it's all gone wrong. And the difficulty then is that, because you've lost it in the final third, it's very easy for Newcastle to counter, because, as we've said, if you lose it in this sort of area, look, the Newcastle players are fairly narrow, but when you lose it in that final third, in that 5v4 against the back line, all it takes is one player to step up a couple of yards. These wingers from Newcastle can just step out wide really quickly, and that's why United are weak. So that was a really frustrating thing to see from United there. Now, the final thing I want to talk about today is the counter-press that we saw from United in this game. Now, as we've mentioned there, we saw some of the sloppiness and the poor sort of play that we had in the final third. And obviously, if you don't control the ball well enough, and you don't get the team up the pitch, you can't be prepared well for the transition, and so your counter-press doesn't have the right sort of conditions to be effective. What you saw from Liverpool when they were at their very best a couple of seasons ago in recent times, before they lost the ball, they were already well positioned to do that. And to be able to be well positioned, you can't rush things in the attacking third. You need to have good decision making there, and you've got to execute things well. And the final clip I'm going to show today, actually, is exactly the opposite of that occurring. So what you see here is Rashford's in possession here, but watch what happens as he lifts his foot to play the pass. So you can see as the clip starts, you can see you've got a run in behind, you've got one runner in behind here, you've got another runner in behind here, you've got Anthony trying to get in behind it there as well. But at this precise moment, right now, none of them are goal threats. None of them are in good goal-scoring positions. You've got the whole Newcastle back four intact and behind the ball. None of those guys are goal threats right now. And look, very clearly, if United lose the ball in this position, United are not well set up to counter-press. The fullbacks aren't up the pitch. Defensive line isn't high enough. We're not set up with the right conditions to press the ball and win it back quickly. So what you see here is, as that ball goes out to Rashford there, you see the forward runners going into the box. You see, as Rashford lifts his foot, again, he can see in front of him. There's nobody actually in a good goal-scoring position. For that ball to come off and McTominay to get beyond his man and actually score is a really difficult ask. And because the rest of the team aren't set up for it, that ball basically has to go off the back. Whether it's a goal, whether it's a goal kick, whether it's a corner, the only way to stop United getting done on transition here is for that ball, however it ends up, whether it's via a shot, whether it's via Rashford messing up the pass, if it goes off the back, United can reset. But otherwise, if Newcastle win the ball back, there's so much space for them to be able to transition quickly. So from that 5v4, what we see is Rashford, he plays that pass in. And now, look, at this point here, when that ball gets headed out, Rashford can see where it's going and decides for some reason inexplicably to go and press the next pass. you can't press the next pass until the ball's been secured. So in this area, what you've got is 3 or 4 Newcastle players looking to break forward. Then Bruno makes a bad decision as well. He decides to go and press the ball, despite seeing Trippier out the corner of his eye, his peripheral vision, making that run down the side. Rashford doesn't make any attempt to track Trippier. Weghorst's nowhere near the ball. Sabitzer's sort of vaguely aware of Joe Willock, but it's very easy for the Newcastle players to find that ball through to Sean Longstaff, and they're straight through our midfield because the conditions for the counter press were not set up well to start with at all. So that's the issue, is that poor decision making, rushing things. Look how deep the back four were there as well. If you do that sort of thing, what you end up with is no midfield. You end up with a situation where it's incredibly easy for the opposition team to transition, and you end up in a situation where if you don't win 1 or 2 duels, there is so much space for the Newcastle players, and there is a big problem there for United. And with that in mind, the last thing we'll look at today is the duels here. And you can see this. In the attacking areas here, this is the Newcastle side, this is Manchester United. United, we only won 26% of our offensive duels. So 1v1 situations, when we had the ball, we only won them a quarter of the time. That is never, ever going to let you break down a team, especially when sort of a lot of the way we play is based on 1v1 matchups, transitional situations. For example, isolating Rashford one-on-one with Trippier. If you're only winning those duels 26% of the time, you're going to really struggle. It's going to be basically impossible for you to break down the other team. And you can see Newcastle got almost 40% of their duels in that sense. And defensively as well, United are winning far fewer duels there than Newcastle. And when the team is so set up for transitional situations, for 1v1 duels, if you don't win your duels, you end up in a terrible, terrible situation, as we saw with United. So, for this United team to step things up on Wednesday night against Brentford, we're going to have to be better in duels. We're going to have to be better in the set piece, a lot better in the set piece. We're going to have to be a lot more aggressive in our own box. And that is the foundation for everything else. You can't do the nice stuff in terms of technically playing the way we want to play until you do the basics right. And once again from United, there were too many players that were lethargic, were weak physically, were lazy, weren't really interested, and that's why we lost the game. Simply, passion, desire, hunger wasn't there. And without that being there, if the technical stuff isn't there as well, you're in for a really poor performance. And for me, if I'm honest, that was a worse performance against Newcastle yesterday than we played in the 7-0 up until the point where we just gave up after 3-0. So it was a really, really poor performance. Thanks for watching the video today. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and hopefully we'll see you again next week, and hopefully a little bit more of a positive review of the Everton game at the weekend. See you next week. Peace.